trajectory that you've placed yourself on as a global liberal studies student. It's a very exciting degree program, and we are looking forward to working with you over the next 4 years. Go ahead and have a seat. One thing I'd like everyone to do before we move to the next stage is actually take out a piece of paper. This is not a presentation where you just get to sit down and basically consume / passively receive information. We want for you to be active participants in the degree, and we also want for you to, how many of you don't have paper? Amazing. So in the future, you'll want to have pieces of paper as well as writing implements, instruments for presentations of this nature, because important information is going to be shared with you. You can go ahead and have the other information. You might not know this. I'd like for you to, underneath your name, write down the top 3 junior academic study sites that you have in mind for the Global Liberal Studies degree. If you don't know the sites, that is a good thing to write down so that you remind yourself that that's something that you will need to do and research. Maybe it's something you want to note down in this meeting when we get to that point. And then also, I want for you to, under those top 3 sites, and you should write them, write down what concentration you have identified as your concentration. Finishing their responses. I'm going to get started on the presentation. So, and it's going to require your participation as well. So, what is Global Liberal Studies? Roz. Yes, what is Global Liberal Studies? I know Roz's name because she had a name tag on, so I thought I was going to pick on her.
Our major.
Wait, what?
Our major.
That's true. What does it include? Quentin. That's your name, right? I totally was stalking his name. The question was, what is Global Liberal Studies? What are the hallmarks of the degree? You do so. There's a junior year away. That's good. What about in the freshman year? Yes.
Okay, so we have our degree courses.
Yes. So correct. So you're right now embarking on a Great Works core curriculum. And so that's what you're starting off with. Now, who can tell me what a Great Work is? What Great Works are? I'm going to put, so somebody is muttering over here. Is a tall person doing it? He helped us out earlier. What's your name? Patrick. What were you saying? Yeah, so the classics. So we're talking about the great thinkers, the great artists, people who've created either have created texts or work and do go into dry, dusty books, but because we expect for you over the course of the 4 years to become part of that conversation. You're already taking part of it, and we want for you to be people who are producing great works by the time you're done with GLS. So all right, so we talked about the Great Works curriculum. Another hallmark of the degree is that this is a program that is not just one that basically pins you to a desk in a classroom, but rather one that asks you to go out into the world, into the place where you're studying, and to learn from it. It's not just about listening to someone like me, but it's also about answering your own questions and beginning to investigate so that you can find out what you need to know to ultimately produce knowledge. One of the hallmarks of GLS, but also of NYU, NYU was founded in the 18-somethings. Who founded it?
Treasury Secretary.
Wait, loudly.
Treasury Secretary Albert Gallatin.
Exactly, Albert Gallatin. Very good. What's your name?
Laura.
Laura, thank you very much. I'm going to learn everyone's names by the end, maybe. I like to have aspirational goals for myself. So, Albert Gallatin founded this university as a university in and of the city. So, and back then, obviously, having a university in and of the city was a big idea. But why was that? Does anybody know? Yes. Yeah, so there was a tradition of, you know, some of the big universities, but I didn't know all of them, actually have walls around them. I remember, so I went to a Big Ten school in the Midwest. That's a land-grant school, which is a big deal, but it means there are a lot of agricultural people there. Anyway, it has no walls. And I remember when I was growing up and we did, you know, a college tour, we went to some places on the East Coast, and I was like, there's a whole thing around this college. They're like walls. It's crazy. Here, obviously, you already know, the city itself is, the city infuses us and we infuse the city. There aren't any walls. Certainly there are walls to buildings, but even with some of our buildings, they aren't just NYU. And Gallatin had wanted the city, well rather had wanted the university to be set up so that basically academic life was not just in the ivory tower out somewhere, but had a meaningful impact on city life. Now, fast forward many, many, many decades. And here we are in an age when, you know, back when Albert Gallatin was around, how long would it have taken for Albert to have gotten from Manhattan to London? Long time. What's your name? Wait, what?
Louis?
Louis. So like weeks, months, right? So exactly, people would get on an ocean liner or a boat or whatever it was, and so long as it didn't sink, they would end up on the other side of the world. The kinds of journeys that people talked about, or like if you read, and you will read at some point, I hope, Marco Polo's diaries, it was many years. There's this funny skit for this comedian, Louis C.K., who you know, do you guys know who he is? Yeah, he's funny, you should look him up. Anyway, so he has this skit about, or rather he was at like the Tonight Show or something, and he was like, there I was, on a plane, sitting down with someone, and have you seen it? Yeah, they were talking about how he sat down by somebody, and it was like this new thing, they had Wi-Fi on the plane, and the Wi-Fi went out. And the dude beside him was like, ugh, nothing, like he just like cursed and was all kinds of, and Louis C.K. is like, how is it, what is this generation? You're flying in the air like a bird. It used to be from going from one part of the country to the other, like whole families would change. People would be born and people would have died, you know. You may have gotten lost in the Rockies somewhere. We live in an age when you can hop on a plane and it takes you very few hours. You know what, it takes 6 hours, 8 hours to get to London? I forget, I try to block it out, the length of the flights. But you can actually literally get to the other side of the world in 12 hours or so, which is incredible. Now what we're looking at is not just trying to have a university that's in and of the city, but we're looking at having a university that's in and of the world. And part of the reason why that is so revolutionary, and it's President Sexton's vision for the university, is because there are very, very few institutions out there that are really thinking about the ways in which education can be global, the ways in which we can share ideas across cities, and the ways in which cities themselves are oftentimes locuses, or is it loca? How do you say it? Whatever, you know what I'm talking about. Where ideas and art is really produced. I mean, these are these crucibles of advancement into the next decade, into the next century. This is also a foundation for you, for these great works, for your next 4 years. And as I was saying, ultimately the idea is that you are now part of a larger conversation that we want for you to be able to participate in. It's starting off in the ancient world, but just because it's starting off with Confucius and Lao Tzu and Plato and Aristotle and Sophocles, etc., or Gilgamesh and so on, those texts themselves have relevance to what we're dealing with today. And we want for you to start off there because we want for you to start making those kinds of connections and start really understanding and examining what are the questions that have been occupying people for year, across year, across year, across culture, across city, again and again. How do you answer those questions based on what moment in time you're located in, based on the fact that you're in Manhattan in 2013? How would you respond differently, or would you respond differently at all to the same kind of questions than the author of Gilgamesh? And how can you potentially make connections between those things? How can you even maybe advance the conversation in some way based on your observation and participation in multiple conversations? And the idea is that this year, while you situate yourself within that conversation, you'll move to, in the sophomore year, more advanced independent study of your own. In the spring semester of the sophomore year, that pilgrimage that's, I don't remember who Charles everyone is, but that pilgrimage that you're on will be one in which you're taking a much more active role. You're going to be focusing on the skills that you're developing and the particular approach and methodology for your own production of knowledge and your own method of adding to the conversation. Which brings me to, and it's going to require participation from all of you as well in a moment, where you just listen. So the idea of being a citizen of the world is one which we bandy about quite often, and one that hopefully you have not gotten tired of. I have not gotten tired of it. And one that I think obviously goes back into the 4th century BC from Diogenes. So ultimately, the idea that on the one hand, we're part of the city, and on the other hand, we're part of the world. There are two impulses, and we're going to watch a video, hopefully, right now, which is by the links of the, no, not.
About the difference between the context in which we...
Cosmopolitanism, but he's essentially looking at the the conundrum in which we as a generation find ourselves in, and that other generations have found themselves in. To whom do we belong? How do we respect difference? Who are we responsible for? How do we... what is culture? So this is a question that you're going to be encountering, bless you, every moment of your degree and for the rest of your life, really. It's not just going to be something that you are struggling with or grappling with in the context of your courses, but these are questions about what it means to be human, what it means to live on this planet, and where we're going, where you as a generation, where we as a planet are moving forward, and how do we deal with those big issues, whether or not it's on the political spectrum, whether or not it's in the creation of art, how do we communicate difference and problems, how do we find a space where we've negotiated some kind of treaty or calm. So, in any case, so you're in the thick of it, and you are a pioneering group as well. This particular program, GLS, is really unique as far as we can tell in the United States, bless you, for a number of reasons. Not only is it both global and local, not only is it investigating global issues through the matrix of a number of different cities around the world, but it's also doing so in a way that really looks at those big conversations that you're currently inserting yourselves in. It's looking at the liberal arts and humanities. It's looking at art and culture and religion and politics. And in many of the global studies degrees that are currently iterated around the United States in particular, much of what they're looking at is quite quantitative in nature. What we're doing something is altogether different. It's situated in the liberal arts tradition, in which case we're talking about those arts and humanities and that global dialogue, much of which is most important to us as people. We don't talk in numbers. We talk in stories. We talk in pictures. We communicate in pictures. We have conversations to figure out how we move forward, and that's part of what you're part of. Wait, thank you very much. That's okay. So we're also looking at New York as a model as well, to a certain extent. Part of the reason the cities where students start, and just to remind you, students are starting in New York, Paris, Florence, and London. These are some of the most global cities in the world. New York in particular, 40% of the people here were born outside of the United States, which means that we're a polyglot city. We're a city that is constantly struggling with what to make of difference, whether or not it's cultural, socioeconomic, political, etc. And these are the questions that are going to be given to you. Again, we as a program as a whole are also spread all over the world, and we're making strides as well in trying to connect you all to one another using social media, which is something obviously Albert Gallatin didn't have. Now we're moving on to the concentrations, and for that I'm going to ask that Anna come up and talk a little bit about the ways in which you'll be focusing on your degree and how you'll be moving forward through it, developing skills and approaches that help you do your own research and lead you to the junior and senior year.
So first of all, how many of you know what concentrations we offer in GLS? How many of you know what a concentration is? Great. So a concentration is similar to a major, but it's less restricted. You're going to hear the word interdisciplinary quite a few times. How many people know what interdisciplinary means? All right, great. So it means instead of going to CAS and being a politics major, you can be a politics, rights, and development major here in GLS. You can spend a year in Tel Aviv. You can learn Arabic fluently while you're there, and then come back your senior year and intern at the UN. It's less restrictive than working or doing a typical major. So this is going to be something that makes you unique. So I'm just going to go, also next week, just to give you a reminder as well, we have the concentration roundtable on the 25th. So while I briefly go over these, take notes, send yourself a text message if you have any questions. I'm not going to answer any questions about this because that's for next week for the concentration roundtable, where the chairs will be there and they'll be able to answer everything that you have. I want you to take questions to them like, what do I do with this concentration? What kind of job could I get? What do I do after I graduate with an identities and representation concentration? So write down any questions you have about this and take it to the roundtable next week. So the first one is, let's see, arts and literature. So this is basically your art history, your English, your comparative literature. This is a concentration that's going to look at dance, at architecture, This is going to incorporate the things that you learned this year in your cultural and social foundations classes. So just an example of one of our seniors who was in arts and literatures concentration. Her thesis title was Effects of the Global Economic Recession in 2007 to 2012 on models of funding for the contemporary visual arts in New York City and Madrid. All right, going on to the next one, contemporary culture and creative production. Everyone's always confused by this. Does anyone know what this is? Exactly, sure. All right, and everyone's best friend, Professor Philip Kane, is the chair of this concentration. So if you have any questions, he's the one to go and talk to. This is creative writing, literary journalism, film, music, architecture and urbanism, advertising, fashion, visual cultures such as photography, and interface design and television studies. So this is if you're interested in media, if you are on Instagram every day, if you check your Facebook every hour. This is contemporary culture and creative production. If you want to produce something new to the world, cutting edge, this is it. All right, the next one is histories, philosophies, and worldviews. Now this is pretty straightforward. This is your history. How did we get here? Philosophies. Why did we get here? What questions do we have? Worldviews. That would be along the lines of maybe religion. All right. So maybe some categories of study in this are histories of international and transnational encounters, war, peace, conquest, imperialism, colonization, decolonization, civilization, and casual. All right, and the next one, identities and representations. Now this is along the lines of anthropology, sociology, psychology. If you're interested in learning about different cultures, maybe the struggles that they have, how they've got to where they are today. Does anybody know what this picture is from? This was taken at Stonewall in the 1970s here in New York City, where the gay liberation front started. And so you're in the city where this happened. If you're interested in this, identities and representations, there's here. So one of the thesis titles that a student did this year, or last year, is Cultural Transnationalism, Perceptions of Colombian Cultures in America. Finding and Breaking Gender, Transatlantic Representations of Intersex Identity. Next one, this is the most popular one. How many of you are thinking of being politics, rights, and development? Great. This encompasses politics, economics, international relations, human rights. This is a really, really fascinating concentration. So some possible categories of study with this would be global justice, international human rights, hunger, malnutrition, and global food systems, colonialism and post-colonialism, dictatorship, democracy and development, political leadership, war and its global effects, peace and conflict studies, genocide, violence, and human rights. So this concentration prepares students for law school, for graduate school, and a wide variety of disciplines, and for careers in education, advocacy, and public service, diplomacy, international organizations, nonprofits, and quite a few other things. So last but not least, this is the last year we're doing this, science, technology, and society. So what is science? Is science different than technology? What is the relationship between science, race, gender, economics, and politics? This is not a concentration where you have to take Gen Chem 1, 2, biology, computer science, all of those. It's more of looking at it from a narrative perspective and how science affects us on a humanistic level. All right, so December 5th, you'll be able to, we will open up the concentrations for you to pick. If you would like to have until next year, you need to start thinking about this. And once again, on the 25th, next week, Wednesday, is the round table, so you should all be there.
I will try to cruise through this so that we can get to your questions. and also so we can pass out some stuff. This is only the beginning of a conversation that will have many additional meeting points. I think I mixed metaphors there, but it's fine. So looking ahead, the junior year. Who knows when you decide what your junior year site is? That's right, it's January. So you will have, that's exactly right, you will have to choose your junior year site on January 31st. You submit to us a preference form. Now, who has an idea of why we asked you so early? Yes?
Language classes. Yes.
Exactly. Was that your answer as well? Yes. So their language classes are a key part. Another thing that we have to do is we are fortunate that we collaborate with the Office of Global Programs to basically try to make sure that every student has a spot at their top choice site. However, more and more students at NYU are studying overseas. Sometimes sites will, let's say, have to take a residence hall offline, etc. Maybe a site's going to get bigger. So we always need to touch base with them and to confirm with them how many spots we can guarantee. And more importantly, we do want to make sure that we've communicated to you with enough advance notice where you're going to be studying so that you can take the appropriate language coursework. Now, the different sites are listed here: Berlin, Buenos Aires, Florence, Madrid, Paris, Shanghai, Tel Aviv. Now, I ask that you each make a list of what your top 3 sites are. So, top site, Berlin. Anybody? The few, the proud, excellent. What about Buenos Aires? More, excellent. Straight arm, so I can see it. Florence. Excellent, hands down. Madrid. Excellent, Spanish speakers. Paris. Figured. And Shanghai. Excellent. And Tel Aviv. Great. So I'm glad to see that you've already started to decide where you're interested in going. Now, we're going to go through the sites quite quickly to talk a little bit about some of the details at each of the sites that are important for you to know. It's so useful and important for you to make sure to pay attention to the academic highlights, because how big would you say the average site is? I'm going to call on you in the orange blazer. Red blazer.
What do you mean in terms of students?
How many, how big is the average, in terms of students? Does anyone else have a guess? We have it, okay, yes.
They're pretty small. Yeah.
How much? Yes, they are, that is correct.
I asked someone last night, they said about 10 people, sometimes less, sometimes more.
Where?
The Shanghai people were like 4. Last
4
year,
people.
That's what they said.
That's what they said. Only 4 people total with NYU and Shanghai.
But they said that. Oh, yeah, GLS is what I was.
It's just confirming. That's right. Okay. What were you going to say?
Someone in Berlin told us like 50, maybe more than 50, and then Tel Aviv is only like 20.
Tel Aviv. Okay. So each site is a different size. Berlin is probably 50 to 80, depending on the semester. Buenos Aires, probably 80 to 100. Florence, any guesses? 350. I know, right? Madrid, about 80 to 100, actually. Paris, that it's not 500. That's part of the issue. Lots of demand, limited space. So Paris has about 120 seats. And that includes graduate students. It's actually a little bit bigger, and freshmen. It's actually a little bit. Shanghai, probably actually about again, 50 to 100, depending on the semester. And Tel Aviv is this semester, I wish I had like a jelly bean jar and then everybody could guess and then somebody would have prize. I don't. There are only 15 students. And a third of them are GLS. Anyway, so it depends on the site, obviously, how big they are. But how many classes do you imagine they might offer for a site that's 15 students?
1, 2.
They offer more. They do offer more than that. But I think it's really important for you to be mindful. How many students are in New York? How about this? Do you know how many liberal studies freshmen there are in New York? Liberal studies, meaning GLS and it's 1,000. Okay, so exactly, 1,000 students. How many students are in GLS?
100 something.
What is the total? So there are actually 80 freshmen in New York and 20 overseas, so about 100 students total. Anyway, that just gives you a sense of, size and scale has an impact on how many classes are available and what times they're available. So it's important for you to make sure to research to see what kinds of classes are offered. You know, especially if you have 3 top choice sites, take a look, because it may be that you realize that you'd actually prefer to be part of the few, the proud, the Berlin students, or maybe you want to go to Shanghai, given the kinds of classes and the kind of focus they have. All right, so we just talked about that. In terms of making a decision, the next thing that you need to know, and we'll finish up just reiterating this as well, is that we will have an all-day info session, or rather series of info sessions, on each site with upperclassmen on Friday, December 6th. We have a handout, we'll give it to you, so you can use the handout, and we will also remind you. In addition, then we'll have a Senior Voices panel, which is on November 6th, I'm going to say, where the seniors are going to talk about their experience at the sites and what they learned. Again, one thing to keep in mind is that much of what you'll be learning and studying and doing is actually also outside of the classroom. So while classes are important for you in making your decision, we don't want for you to think of learning as purely passive, but rather think of the things that you can do yourself and research. So like going to Florence, would you be able to go to the EU archives, which are there? Would you maybe be able to get involved with the La Pietra policy dialogues, which brings leading thinkers and politicians from around the world? And then, so we just talked about that. So moving on. And then, of course, make sure to also be mindful of the kinds of cultural influences on a particular reason. A good example is you might be interested in, really, you could study this anywhere so long as you're willing to take it on yourself. But, for example, Madrid has had many different layers of religious influence that have had pretty significant impacts on the architecture that you could study. Or take a look at Buenos Aires and think about the colonial effect of a city being settled, and also the diasporas that have helped inform what the population of that city is, which include not only the Spanish speakers and people from elsewhere in Latin America, but the indigenous people from the countryside, the Italians who left during periods of extreme poverty. They didn't just come to the United States, they also went elsewhere. And next thing. And then also think about your professional goals. One of the things that we will be helping you all with, but that's important for you to keep in mind, is that you'll be doing a class called Experiential Learning, whose goal is to immerse you in the, and again, not in just a passive way. We're not just going to be like, putting you somewhere, but rather you're going to be going out into the community and working with people. Working, and by work I mean doing some kind of activity / labor. It could be volunteering, It could be, and in many cases it will have to be volunteering given the local laws, but it will give you immersive experience and language proficiency at the site. Or it may be an internship, or it may be an independent project, because given your academic goals, it may be more useful and fruitful for you to do an independent, like to go to those EU archives and to study, or to interview people within a particular neighborhood because of your interest in, say, the North African diaspora and settlement of neighborhoods in the banlieue around Paris. So, one's destination is never a place, but a way of seeing things. This year will be important for you, given that you'll also start to, you're broadening your perspective, what metropolitan life is, what it's like to live in an urban, very multicultural setting. For some of you, it's maybe old hat, but it may be that you haven't ever lived in New York before. So this in and of itself may be a novel experience for you. So it's important for you, I think, to, not I think, but it is important for you to be mindful of what you're experiencing now, what you're learning in the context of your courses, your experiences, and the skills that you're gaining in acclimating and transitioning to university life. I remember when I first got to college, I was like, whoa, this is a whole thing. I'm doing everything myself. My mom is not helping me with laundry, etc. That may not be an issue for you, but it was for me. Also living in a building with just a giant number of other people, because I wasn't from a city and I was from a small town, like gravel road, like nearest neighbor was a mile, and then suddenly I was, you know, bunking with another person and also sharing a bathroom with 35 of my best friends, or not really. So you're getting, you're getting skills in transitioning to a new living situation, and it's useful for you to pay attention to how do you find solitude? How do you calm yourself down when you have a stressful encounter? Where are the places where you can get support? And those are the kinds of skills and self-knowledge that you're going to need to take to the site too. So this year is transformative. You're getting the skills that will make your year overseas a really positive one. So now moving on to the sites. So Berlin, just really quickly, I'll do my best to be quick. Art history, sociology, some environmental studies classes. Anyone who's interested in potentially going to get a PhD in art history should know that the three main languages you need to have proficiency in are German, French, and Italian. There are a lot of great art history classes, including some that get you into the city in Berlin, working with the museums there. And I think that one of the most interesting things about Berlin, just again, this is personal, there are many interesting things about Berlin, is the history that it has of the 20th century. I was a kid when the wall came down, and that was an amazing experience, I think, for many of us who grew up in the 80s. And I think for many other people in the Western world, because two countries that had been separated for many, many years suddenly were reunited. Germany as a country has had some really amazing transformative experiences for the people who live there, but it also has had a real effect on how the city itself is planned, the museums that are open and available, and the kind of economic issues that they're struggling with, or rather dealing with, because they are one of the strongest economic forces in the European Union. And another thing that's important too in terms of the art history is that the museums and much of the architecture, and I can't say too much more about this because I'm not an expert, is it's interesting to me that some of those places had to be rebuilt because they were bombed. So what is art? What is culture? What are reproductions and how do they fit into art preservation? Is it important for us to reproduce things that were destroyed or fell apart? So there are really interesting issues about preservation that you can study there, among many others. German language studies, something you need to do. Obviously, I touched on a few of the regional influences and historical trends, which you can also research yourself. And then also, you should know that it's important for you, if you go to Germany, to have as advanced a level of German as possible. While there are English language speaking opportunities for students, internships in Germany are extremely competitive. So if that's something that you want to do, it's best for you to start as soon as possible with the German. Moving on. Buenos Aires, the colonial issue can be investigated there. That's a really key point. It's really the only site where you have that opportunity to investigate how, quote unquote, the New World was colonized and the ways in which the cultural issues played out, both on an economic but cultural basis. We already touched base about some of the diasporas that informed the community, but also, you know, how does, and this is a question for the Americans too, how does one create an identity of a culture and a cultural quote-unquote brand when it's a new power? Students will be staying in, first of all, I should say Berlin. They stay in a residence hall. Students stay in homestays in Buenos Aires. One of the advantages that seems to be compelling for students, the same way that Tel Aviv has a beach, Argentina, it's summer when you go. You will have a year and change of no winter. So think about that. And obviously students have really liked it. The Spanish, because the Argentine site came out of the Spanish department, there's a lot of emphasis on Spanish speaking and Spanish cultural study. And there are a lot of amazing opportunities to work with NGOs, partly because of the crisis of the Argentine economy and the manner in which there are a lot of worker-owned cooperatives that formed after there was a flight of capital and investors back to Europe. So there's some really interesting experiments in labor and factory work down there. Now Florence, this is one of our oldest sites. Italian language, again with the art history, the La Pietra policy dialogues, which I mentioned, and they probably have the biggest breadth of courses, varying in some quite traditional subjects like psych, business, etc. Okay, homestays, you can do global families, the guest lecture series, we talked about that. Okay, let's move on. All right, Madrid. This was our first global site. It's been around for 50 years. Actually more than 50 years. Spanish language is a focus, again, and they do have some environmental studies. The North African diaspora, the religious effects that I was talking about earlier are important. And again, you can do homestays, or you can live in an apartment by yourself. Let's go on, I don't want to keep you guys too long. Paris, this is the most competitive. If you would like to go to Paris, you should really have advanced French study, even by January, when you put in your preference. So that's an important consideration. They do have homestays, and they also have apartments, and then students are able to take their classes at many different Parisian institutions. So that is certainly an option. And again, they're very, very, how do I put it? It's been around for 40 years. It comes from the French language department, the site, and there are two programs of study. There's program 1, which is the English language or not as strong French program, and program 2, which is all taught in French. And so that's where we really like for you to be in, especially, again, for placements, you need to be at the advanced level so that you're able to get any kind of meaningful placement for your experiential learning. We're almost done. 2 more. Business, Shanghai, China. The portal, that's a new thing. The portal just opened this year. We have students who are going to be there for all 4 years. We're currently on a campus of East China Normal University, but we'll be moving to the Pudong area, which is the businessy area, probably in the next couple of years. And they have some really great language exchanges. There are a couple of different housing options. That will likely change when the portal opens, because they're breaking ground on the building even right now. Super easy to get a placement there or an internship. And in terms of the English language, there are these pockets of, basically in the French concession, of people who are like the Germans, the French, the English, the Americans. So oftentimes students are actually able to get placements where they don't necessarily have to use their Chinese all the time. And Tel Aviv. They have an amazing offering of courses, despite the fact that they're a teeny site at this point. They are growing, and they have some really amazing courses that give you an opportunity to look at the complexity of Middle Eastern politics. Students at this site are the only students who are able to do either one language or another. So you can either do your preparatory language coursework in Hebrew, or it can be in Arabic. The students who were there last year, our first year, actually when they arrived decided to take coursework in both because they were so interested in being able to look at the local situations from both perspectives and having interactions with people on site in either neighborhood. Even though there are a fair number of people in Tel Aviv who do speak English, and the beach is apparently amazing. And there are a lot of people who visit. It's still obviously important for you to learn the local language, especially for the placements. They do have an amazing set of placements, more than others. Typically they're politically oriented. And you get to go to the Dead Sea and float in it. Who wouldn't want to go? Yes. Helen Keller said that, and so I put a dragon up apparently. Obviously. Okay, moving on. So we're getting toward the end, and then we're going to open it up to questions. But it's really important for you to note that actually I'll do it for you this time. Who has had trouble explaining what GLS is? All right. Okay, so I will give you my 2-minute pitch. All right. Global Liberal Studies is a pioneering interdisciplinary degree that prioritizes global study, and that has several different features. Part of the reason you haven't heard of it, you can say this, is because it's so groundbreaking. And that's true. That's a true thing. So, part of the reason for that is because you have a full year of study at a global site. You also do immersive experiential learning. One of the things that I was looking at, and I know I'm getting off my 2-minute spiel, which means it's not 2 minutes, but I want to explain something. So, I got some data recently, and it said that out of all of the undergraduates in the United States, doesn't matter what citizenship they are, just undergraduates in the United States, 14% of them study abroad. Okay? 14%. Now, of those 14%, how many of them do you think study abroad for a semester? So I have a guess for all of them?
80% higher.
80% or higher?
94.
94%? How many of them study abroad for a short term, meaning summer term or less? What? 70. I love it. I'm like 73%. Could it be? And then how many of them, this is the most important question, and it's the last question and then I'll tell you. How many of them study outside of the U.S. for more than a semester, meaning obviously a year? Okay, so the way that the numbers play out, 56% of the students do a short course. That means that over half of the students of that 14% are only going for a summer or for, sometimes they go for a week. Some of you may know students who do these freshman abroad things where they go for 2 weeks, that's part of their orientation, and then they start somewhere. It's a bonding experience, apparently. I believe that. It is, I am sure. But that's their study abroad. So, of the others, 40-something%, I think 40%, are studying for a semester. That means 5% of the students are studying for a year, over a semester. That's a teeny tiny amount. So that's not just, that's of the 14%. That's not of all students in general. That's just of that 14%. So by choosing this program, you've already selected a program that, I'm blinded, that is going to distinguish you. How many of you know someone who's already said to you, I think I want to be a psychology major? Right? Politics? Right? Do you know people who are doing psych or politics, etc.? Right? How many people, aside from the people in this room, do you know who are doing something like you are? So it's really important that you keep in mind as you're moving forward how distinctive you're already making yourself. The person, the average psych major who goes out there is competing with a bajillion other psych majors. But you have a degree that's distinctive and that it will make people ask you, what is this? But that means that you start the conversation and you help them understand. Now the things that I didn't, I got distracted with data and quizzing you on percentage points, was that you get the advanced level language skills, you also get year-long global study, the experiential learning that gives you an internship experience, which further distinguishes you from the students who do a full year away or a semester away, and then you do the senior thesis. Very few universities require a senior thesis, the same thing with programs. Partly because it's a very intensive process for students. So they will be doing, you know what, it means that you'll be doing 40 pages or more of independent work that you will have done research for in the junior and senior year. So that's going to be another layer of differentiation for you on your resume. There's some other resources. We'll give you a handout so we can go on. And then here are the key dates, which are, and don't get up, we're not done. They're on the back table. Did everybody sign in? Okay, because there should be a sign in. But before we close, can you go to the next one? All right, so I'd like to take a couple of questions.
Regarding work study and paid opportunities through immersion learning. I know it's different at each site, and certain sites it's easier or harder, so
right.
Just elaborate on that.
So the question is, and this is an important one I think for all of you, is work study and the opportunity to do paid immersion work. So depending on the visa and the country that you're going, you may or may not be able to work on the site. Typically, the work study opportunities are like one job, but that's not immersion. Because that would be working at the site with other, typically bicultural folks. So, so we should distinguish that. What students will tend to do is, more often, is there are a lot of babysitting / tutoring / etc. opportunities that people tend to pick up while they're away. But oftentimes you're so busy with your coursework that you might not have time to work. That said, we do take into account that you're away and that there is a process by which you notify the financial aid office so that they're aware that you're going away, and that we try to also make additional funds available to you on a very modest level to basically take that into account. There is a scholarship, for example, for students who would lose their work study money by doing an abroad experience that you can apply for example. Yes?
I was wondering, how do you select where, like, how do you choose who gets to go where?
Typically, everybody gets to go where they want to, unless they want to go to Paris, in which is a difficult conversation. Does that help?
So
Do you want me to talk about Paris? All right. So typically for Paris, what's most important for you, and the questionnaire itself has a lot of very detailed questions about why would you want to go to this place? What are you hoping to achieve and research while you're there? What we want for you to do is think about this. It's not that we're going to say to you, you told us you were going to research the effects of street cleaning in X arrondissement, and you didn't do that. That's a weird research project. But in any case, we're not going to chase you down. What we're wanting to see is that you've thought about it. What are you thinking about doing while you're there? What subject areas are you interested in? Have you started to at least, have conversations with your professors or have conversations with your peers or your family about what kind of things would I want to study there? Have you done even a Wikipedia search to see music/Paris? Because you want to look at the street musicians or the people who are going in between metro. There are a lot of accordions in the metro, just as an FYI. Why is that? So we want to see that you've gone at least through some of the steps of thinking about what you might want to do. In addition to, obviously, French language skills are important. Yeah. You guys are tired, aren't you? You want to be released. Is there any last question? Hunger. No, I'm hungry too. I agree. We're all hungry. Okay, so before you go, if you have questions, feel free to ask me. One of the things I want you to all do is take a look at what people eat for breakfast in your top choice site. Kudos and bonus points for anyone who puts that on their questionnaire.